Let's start.
Yeah, sir. I think so. It seems like it.
Huh?
I feel.
Yeah, it's better. Well, I've got it. So if you need, I can.
It seems all right.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Let's start our second seminar of this summer school. We have the honor and the pleasure to have here Professor Jay Seawright, who has been instructor here for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times, I don't know. It's a huge pleasure to have you here once more. Dr. Seawright's work focuses on multi-methods research and representation in times of democratic decline. She's studied weak representation in South America's party system, wealth-driven distortion in the US and Latin America, and institutional effects on gender representation. Currently, she's researching right-wing extremist networks behind the January 6th and January 8th congressional invasions in the US and Brazil. Her seminar today is titled Mixing Data Science and Qualitative Methods Research Design and an Application to the Study of Women's Participation on Alex Jones' InfoWars. Thank you very much once more for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours, Professor.
As always, when I give a talk, I have a totally different title on the slides because I'm just undefeated at that. It never fails. But so on the slides, it's mixed methods and machine learning, design and application to the study of the US far right. It's the same talk, but whatever, different title, fine. What we're going to talk about today, there's a lot of methodological literature that exists across the social sciences about how to productively mix methods, the quantitative and qualitative methods, experimental methods, ethnography, whatever. A lot of this focuses on older quantitative tools. So there's a huge amount of work that talks about how should we mix case studies and regression, how do we want to triangulate these or integrate them together, how should we choose cases to fit with, I should hold this one, here, yeah. How should we choose cases to fit with our regression, how should we use cases to better support maybe a natural experiment if we want to get really up to date and use a method that's from the 20th century and not the 19th century. Very, very up to date. But the thing is, quantitative methods is a research area, statistics and related fields, that just keeps moving. These darn statisticians and computer scientists don't stop coming up with new things. And there are statistical techniques, I know this is news to everyone, that have been invented in, let's say, the last 30 to 50 years. And we might think, how could we mix qualitative research with those techniques? A lot of the literature doesn't really address that. There are, at this point, extremely few methodological articles about how to combine the flagship methods of data science and sort of related techniques in the social sciences with qualitative methods. There are a few articles out there about how can we use qualitative methods together with text as data, how can we use qualitative methods together with machine learning. And like most early methodological articles, what those really say is you can do it. And it's very nice that we've been given permission. But good methodology goes beyond that and gives us specific designs that are productive. And that's what I'm going to try to do today, is take some examples of machine learning and qualitative methods that are in specific ways fruitful, either for the qualitative side or for machine learning, where we can mix them together to address weaknesses with one or the other tool. So, yeah. We're going to try to combine our methods based on strengths of one method covering for the weaknesses of the other, not just sort of use them next to each other because it's cool to have two tools. It is cool to have two tools, but it's even more cool when combining them together gives us better research than either tool alone. That's our goal with the design. In order to do that, we're going to try to identify the assumptions used in our machine learning tools and our case study tools, and use techniques from the other fields to fill them in. People in my class might recognize some of this stuff. This is how I approach mixed method research in general. We're using it today at some of the more cutting edge kinds of things. Right. So today I'm going to talk about a few specific approaches that we can use that really bring us towards the cutting edge of where we can be in terms of mixed method research. First, we might be interested in doing process tracing, which is a key qualitative method for causal inference. One of the things we need when we're qualitative researchers and we're trying to do causal inference with a case is we need a very broad and inclusive sense of the possible explanations within that case. Doing a case study where we have like only a narrow set of possible explanations is going to lead us to miss some questions we need to ask about our case. There are going to be documents we don't look for or interview questions we don't ask. And it's expensive and frustrating to have to go back and do it again because we didn't think about a possible explanation early enough. We need ways of sort of having a big, broad, inclusive set of possible explanations before we start. The suggestion I'm going to make is that we can use machine learning before we start to help build an inventory of theories and explanations to test with our case study research. This can be in combination with our standard approach, which is like read the literature, right? And grab the same 5 or 6 theories as everyone else. On top of that, we can do this other thing. I'm going to show an example of how this works in a minute. We're also going to look at a really common problem in presenting qualitative research to other people, which is you've done your work and you have a huge collection of documents or interviews or focus groups or whatever. And so you have, let's say, 650 pages of text. And you want to convey that to the audience. So in a talk like this, how do you do that? Do you like show the whole thing on the screen real fast? You can't do that, right? You can't have people read everything you've read without asking them to do all the work you've done, which isn't fair. Instead, what people usually do is pull like a couple of selected quotations, basically out of context, and sort of say, hey, this is what's in there. That's fine. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's not as good as we'd like. In quantitative research, we have tools for showing our whole data set to people. We have things like scatter plots and descriptive statistics. In qualitative research, you don't really have that, right? It's hard to come up with tools for presenting a whole data set. But text as data methods can kind of help with that. We can run those models on our collection of interview notes or documents from the archive and show people, here's the set of topics in my collection, here's some sample documents, and then when we pull quotations out, we can position them vis-a-vis the whole collection and give people a clear sense of what everything in the collection looks like while we're giving our qualitative examples. It gives people an opportunity to have a taste of our whole archive without having to do the work of reading everything. We can also use text as data methods to help make qualitative approaches to concepts more rigorous. I'm going to leave this a little vague and show you what I mean when we get to it. That's easier than explaining it up front. Finally, we can use qualitative reading to enhance and deepen standard machine learning designs. And I'll explain that one a little more later on as well. So let's start with the first one. We're going to improve process tracing by broadening our set of theories up front. So as I said, we really want to have our full range of topics before we start. So what we're going to do is collect some kind of data set that covers the topic of interest and that has as many variables as we can find. This doesn't have to be like a perfect data set that we would defend for like causal inference. We're not going to like publish this and claim this is our final finding. This is a utility data set, but it's a data set that's related to our topic and has lots of information in it. we're going to use a machine learning method to identify predictors connected to the variable of interest and rule out ones that don't have a statistical relationship. And then we're going to look closely at those predictors. Some of them, I guarantee, are going to be really weird. When you do this right, you're going to see variables nobody uses in social science. And you're going to look at it and say, whoa, that's got to be a fluke. And the whole point of this method is not to do that. Instead of throwing these variables out, sit with them and think about them. One project I did, I was looking across Latin America at the levels of partisanship by country over time. And we don't have like really great theories to explain why some countries have more partisans than others. We have theories about individual partisanship, but not like macro partisanship that are very good cross-nationally. So instead of testing a theory, I just did this and kind of threw everything we had at it with a machine learning method. One of the variables that came back as predictive of partisanship was how long a package coming into the country from like FedEx or whatever spends in customs. The longer a package spends in customs on average, the more partisan a country is. That's pretty weird, right? So I looked into this and I thought, okay, well that seems stupid. But I looked into it. And see, countries that have super long waiting times, what's the deal? It doesn't take a long, long time to process a package, right? Like that maybe takes a month or two. If a package is in there for 3 years, which were some of the numbers I was seeing, that means someone's waiting for a bribe, right? And if people are waiting for a bribe, you either pay or you get someone politically connected to help you. And when you need political connections, a good way to do that is by having a party help you. Those kinds of bureaucratic institutions make parties more useful. Poor quality bureaucratic institutions make parties more useful, right? You don't want just a personal relationship with some fixer when you're going to have to solve bureaucratic problems like that all the time. You want a party relationship so that you don't have to keep making side deals again and again and again and again with a whole bunch of different bosses. You can make a deal with the party, and then you have it fixed. Parties are more valuable when the state is bureaucratically corrupt. Right, okay, that's a theory. But it's a theory that I didn't have before I saw that stupid FedEx number, right? That's the kind of idea we have here. Okay, so the example I have here, we've got a bunch of data about, we're gonna be talking about weird stuff from America a lot today. I hope you're okay with that. Right now, I want to know what is the rise of the alt-right, right? This far-right movement in the US that I guess is kind of dominant at the moment, very important political movement that's transformed American history in substantial ways. We don't really know for sure what causes this. Lots of people have ideas, but we need to understand what the possible range of explanations might be. One of the main media sources connected to this movement is a big media network called InfoWars, run by Alex Jones. How many of you know who Alex Jones is? Those of you who don't, he's the frogs are gay guy. Okay, if you don't know that, you can look it up later, or don't, maybe don't, but anyway, that's who we're talking about. I have transcripts of all broadcasts on this network since 2008. Because, you know, I'm a fun-loving person. It's likely, I claim, that whatever's responsible for the growth of the alt-right has left traces in these discussions, because this is one of the biggest media networks there. So what we can do, what I'm going to take a look at, is which words are being discussed at times when Google search for the term alt-right is popular. So we're going to take not an OLS regression, because OLS regression has a hard cap on how many independent variables you can include. And we're going to use every single word in these transcripts as an independent variable. That's a lot of independent variables. We're going to use lasso regression, which includes a penalty at the end, which allows me to include as many independent variables as I want. A lot of them will be set to 0. That's fine. The ones that pop out are the ones that still matter. That makes this a kind of a machine learning or a data science tool. And what we can do with that is use every single word in these transcripts as an independent variable, how many times it shows up in a daily broadcast. And the dependent variable is Google Trend scores for alt-right, which shows us how much search activity there is on the term alt-right, how many new people are flowing into that community over time. When we do that, I also do the same thing for Proud Boys and whatever. So I do that for Alex Jones, alt-right, Proud Boys. We're looking here at people finding Alex Jones and Proud Boys, not alt-right in this case. But how are people finding Alex Jones? How are people finding the Proud Boys? Not the whole alt-right movement in this one. So when we look at people finding Alex Jones, we see some kind of weird words, right? Maybe not surprising. There's a lot of words in the data. So at the top word, yeah, Bolsonaro. I kind of strategically cut off the list at 4 because I thought y'all might like to see that one. Bolsonaro is there. Yeah, people are looking for, that is of interest to people. When Alex Jones talks about Brazil, that does somehow lead to new people finding Alex Jones. What's going on with that? Well, there is an awful lot of Bolsonaro talk. In my transcripts, Alex Jones talks about Bolsonaro more than 10,000 times. He also talks about Orban about 5,000 times. This is someone who's very invested in the international aspect of the current far-right movement. So that suggests that in explaining the rise of this, we shouldn't be focusing solely on domestic American politics. There's something here that's an alliance or a spillover factor that these people are strategically drawing on and appealing to, I think. Again, this is theory. Like, I'm not proving that here, but it's plausible. And this is some supporting evidence to look further into that. But looking at the 3 above this, those 3 are kind of weird, right? Like this number 877-789-253-9-877-789-2539. Okay, it's the same number twice. That's a phone number. And it's a phone number being repeated twice. What this is the call-in number for InfoWars Studio. And what it is when Alex Jones is going to take calls from the audience, he repeats that number twice and says, call in and talk to me. We see that positively connected with people discovering him and joining the movement, which I think makes a lot of sense. One of the things about this movement is that there's a strong parasociality, a strong sort of quasi-social relationship between the celebrities of the far right and rank and file members. And this kind of call in and chat with me on the air, argue with me, have a connection, is part of that. It's a way that Alex Jones can sort of take ordinary citizens and bring them into having a momentary personal relationship with him. It's going to grow the movement. I'm going to skip the sanctimoniously. That's an advertising word, it turns out. Weird, but yeah, true. Papert is the name of a guy, Tom Papert, who had a bunch of websites that were allegedly independent of InfoWars. But we found out during Alex Jones's recent trials for defamation, because you see he accused the parents of a bunch of kids who got killed in a school shooting of being actors and encouraged his audience to go abuse them for years. And then they sued him and he lost. During that trial, his lawyer, who was extremely competent, sent an image of his entire cell phone to the prosecuting, to the other side's attorney, and then when notified of it, didn't do anything. So all of Alex Jones's emails and text messages and everything for several years became public record, which is pretty cool for researchers. Not so great for Alex Jones, maybe, but pretty good for us. And from those, we know that Papert and Jones were secretly collaborating to create these allegedly independent websites. Jones was paying Papert to create independent websites that would link to InfoWars and talk about how good the journalism was so that they could drive up Google search results for InfoWars. That's kind of amazing. This cost more than $2 million to create this network of websites. So this points to a couple of things, I think. One is that there's a deliberate manipulation of the information environment. The second is that there's really quite a lot of money going on here. And those are both things that we probably want to look into. Now, we could keep going. The list keeps going on beyond what I just showed. We have the Proud Boy stuff we could look at. There's more. But already we have a fair amount of stuff we could go do case study work with. This is a method that I think is really helpful when you're at the beginning of a qualitative research project. You can go well beyond what you're planning to do by doing something like this. I think this is a way of bringing these methods together that has real opportunities. Okay, next. You've done your project. You have a bunch of texts, and you're trying to communicate them to the audience. Yeah, so the method we're going to offer here involves running a simple text as data model. It doesn't have to be simple. If you're good at text as data, go crazy. Do something complicated, fine. But there are real advantages to doing something simple, which is that it's easy to explain to the audience what you've done. So I'm going to run a simple text as data model with no control variables, just sort of basically a cluster analysis of all the texts, and then show you the results that come out of that. Summarize the selected topics using qualitative readings of selected text. So we're going to pull the most representative case from each cluster and look at them really quickly to kind of see what the different topics mean. And then use the sort of statistics connected to the text to explain what other texts might be as we move forward. So the texts we're going to use are the documents related to the US Department of Justice prosecutions of people who invaded the US Capitol on January 6th. All of these prosecutions are, as of now, over. All of the people who participated are pardoned. Everyone we're about to see is no longer a criminal of any kind, and all their deeds were erased. So everything you're about to see is just fine officially as per the president, but I still have evidence and I can show you. So there are too many documents for me to show them to you all. Are nearly 3,000 of them. Now, I've read them. It's very enjoyable. Lots and lots and lots of repetition. A great amount of really cool violence. No triggering and no trauma. But I'm not going to show it all to you because we would be here for months. I want to give you a sense of it, though. And in order to do that, I run a text as data model. This is a structural topic model, as I said, with no control variables. I filtered out some of the normal stop words, so we got rid of the, and, things like that. And as a result, we get 8 topics like this. Now, looking at the topics here, it's extremely difficult to tell what they are, in my opinion. They all look pretty similar. They're just kind of, yeah, lots of stuff about, I don't know. Some of them have some bad words in them. I apologize. I probably shouldn't bring swear words into this august room, but whatever. It's right-wingers. I can't control them. But it's much easier to tell what these are by actually looking at some of the underlying texts. So, right, I have, okay. Topics 3 and 7 are some judicial process documents, like dismissing cases, whatever. I don't care very much about those. It's good to have topics that group them together, because then we can ignore those topics. I'm not going to talk further about them, though. Topic 2 is plea bargains, which is useful, again, but not that cool. And topic 5 is charge sheets, which is like lists of what people are charged with and where they were arrested, again, fine. Those are all court things that courts need and that are not very social science interesting to me. So that's 4 topics that we're going to kind of throw out. Boom. But that leaves us 4 other topics that we care about. So topic 1, the most representative, the most central topic in this cluster is the stipulation of facts in the case of Jonathan Davis Lawrence. Everybody knows that name, I'm sure. These people are all celebrity. No, of course not. This is the guy. See? Very selfie-taking Duluth man. I don't know, that guy. What did Jonathan Davis Lawrence do? Well, we have from the newspaper article that he laughed it off with friends on Facebook when they said he shouldn't be in the Capitol. We got into the Capitol, walked around, chanted some slogans and stuff. We weren't in there to tear bleep up, just disrupt the system. We had fun, lol. And then he kind of left. Security camera footage, they followed him through the rotunda. He took selfies in front of a statue. That's it. So topic 1, we have people who just kind of walked in, walked around, behaved like they were at Disneyland or something, did some selfies, and left. Right? For topic 4, our representative topic is an affidavit about the activities of Brandon Nelson and Abram Markovsky, who are these 2 blurry people, right? And what we have from them is Nelson said that police were guiding people inside. Markovsky said an agent told him, I can't make you guys leave, however you should. Surveillance images say they spent a while inside, they drove back. So they're also, kind of similar. They had a little more interaction with the police. There's more basis for thinking that they had some amount of confrontation, but no evidence of violence there. Topic 6, we have a statement of offense for Daniel Ray Caldwell, who's this guy, the one with the spray in his hand. That is bear spray, which is like mace, but more so, which he's spraying at police. So he might be worse, possibly. More violent, at least. I'll avoid the normative thing. During he taunted police officers by asking them to spray him and asking if they were scared. So, okay, cool. He said, do it again and we'll spray you back. And then he did spray them back and he got 15 of them. So that's pretty outstanding, I guess. That's definitely a guy. And then topic 8. The most representative document is the Matthew Capsule document. This is the guy who got 18 months in prison for fighting with the National Guard. Let's see if I got, yeah, here he is. You can see him there fighting with the National Guard. So we kind of have a spectrum here. From people who walked through without interacting with the police at all, people who walked through and interacted with the police nonviolently, people who had clear violence, and in this last category, people who did violence, and also with the Capsule case, tried to recruit other people, which I didn't show you as clearly, but he did that as well. So we have a range of different categories. With those categories, we can do some different things. If we want, we can choose specific documents and specific cases and do case study work on them while positioning them vis-a-vis the broader collection. But we can also answer some interesting questions. One topic that's come up as a source of argument in the US is how violent was January 6th? And people have chosen individual cases to make a story one way or the other. You can choose the cases of, for example, the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers who were the front line and broke in and make it seem very, very violent. You can also choose the cases of the people who went in the second hour of the event and make it seem like it was extremely nonviolent and largely a protest action. How much of the event was one and how much was the other? With our data, we can sort of answer that. And it turns out that there's this kind of range, where a certain percentage were nonviolent, and it's a substantial part of the protest. But there was actually a substantial proportion of people who were engaged in quite violent action as we can see from the case file. So, our ability to situate these people across the spectrum does a good job of that. I have an example that I'm not going to go into where we pick a specific case and look at the number. It works out. So if you want to do some case study stuff, you get these folks. And yeah, this guy was in the 8 category, and he's very violent. So okay, fine. But this technique that allows you to situate your specific cases within a broader framework is really useful when you're trying to present a bunch of evidence to your audience. It gives them a landscape before you dive into the specifics, and I think that has some value too. Okay, next. If we want to do the work of formalizing concepts, of forming our concepts, right? In qualitative research, a lot of the time, we talk about choosing concepts that have a bunch of positive traits, right? A good concept is going to preserve the meaning of neighboring concepts, reflect existing usages, capture core definitional attributes, and sort existing cases. Of those 4, the top 3 are kind of linguistic traits that we can measure vis-a-vis common usage, right? If we collect a whole bunch of examples of how people use a word, we can see what the words that people use together with it are. We can see what the defining attributes are by how people use it. And we can see what the range of meanings are by how many different usages there are. So we can actually kind of measure these conceptual choices formally. We don't have to limit ourselves to what's often done in qualitative conceptual studies, where you pick 5 or 6 or 7 really cool examples and focus in on them. You can pick all the examples, which is just what Max Wayland and I did. So we were interested in how people in the social sciences use the term extremism. And we selected every journal article since 1980 in anthropology, political science, sociology, and economics that uses extremism, extremist, and other forms of that word. It's been published in a scholarly journal with an impact factor about, I can't remember, at some cut point. We just got all of them. And we downloaded PDF copies of all of them. And then we used text as data models to understand the dimensionality and content of this collection, with the goal of meeting the qualitative criteria for good concept formation. We want to understand usage along these dimensions by capturing how all of these people are already using extremism. And we can read topics from examples from topics to look at meanings as well. So yeah, I'm going to grab the political science and sociology collection since from 1990, not use the whole thing. That's for the article. Okay. And I'm going to skip the code part because that's fine. We end up with a collection of 7 topics that come out of this. This is a little too small and a little too light. This is not showing up as well as I hoped. But, right. Across these 7 topics, what we end up seeing is that there are really quite different usages of extremism. Political scientists tend to think about extremism often in ideological spatial terms. That like extremists are people who are far from the ideological center. So like the centrists are, I don't know, liberals or something, and extremists are communists and fascists because they are far from the middle. But it turns out that there are multiple other traditions of usage within the published literature. There are traditions that focus not on ideas but behavior. Extremism is tactical. So extremists are people who use violence against the state. Extremists are people who engage in unconventional protest activity. Extremists are, unfortunately, Muslims, is a large part of the literature, right? Extremists have a range of meanings other than just ideological position. So this suggests to us that there could be a multifaceted meaning to this concept that's interesting. Clearly we see that in scholarship. The question is, does that maybe also show up in popular usage, right? So we have an ongoing research agenda to try an experimental thing to see if this also happens for popular folks. Like, what happens if you change a person's traits so that their ideology is more or less centrist, but they use different tactics, or they come from a more or less marginalized group, and so on and so forth? Does that make them seem more or less extreme? And what does that do to your opinions about them? Because the concept actually is not as well defined as most political scientists think. And I think that has interesting implications. This is a sort of approach to concept work that's really available for almost anyone, as long as you have access to a good library where you can download articles, right? Or I guess the Russians, which I'll just not say any more about. Yeah, okay. Finally, our last topic for today is, what if you're doing a standard machine learning kind of design and you want to use case study research to add to that? So there's lots of ways you can do this. Qualitative research is better than machine learning and quantitative methods at meaning and at looking at long trajectories for a single case. So these are two things we're going to try to take advantage of in the design I'm going to show. So the example I'm going to give is coming from a project in process with a grad student of mine named Elizabeth Good. So we're going to carry out a standard quantitative design, carry out qualitative in-depth reading, and so on and so forth. Right, yeah, exactly. Fine. So our question has to do with how and why women participate in the far right in the US. This is, I think, a kind of interesting problem because the far right is a strongly, I'm going to say, patriarchal movement. It's a strongly pro-male movement. It emphasizes that women ought to be in the home, ought to be in roles as mothers. It doesn't really give a lot of room for women in leadership type positions or public advocacy type positions. So how would a woman publicly advocate for a movement that says that she should not probably be publicly advocating? It seems like a complicated needle to thread. So in order to look at this, we took a random sample of 1,000 of our InfoWars broadcasts, of our Alex Jones broadcasts, and we took these and sliced them up in a particular way. So, hold on, let's get this right. We sliced every broadcast into individual speech acts by speaker. We used PyAdNote to do this. So every time the speaker changes from one person to another, we split that into a separate file. So we have a bunch of speech turns per file. For each speech turn, we determined the probability that the speech was a female voice. Here, female is like female presenting. So this is based on the vocal pitch and some other determinable traits. I would be coded as male. All right, whatever. It is what it is. And then we also transcribe each speech turn using Whisper AI. So we're going to compare the female presenting speech turns to the male presenting speech turns in terms of things like the topics being discussed. One thing I can tell you up front, there are way more male speech turns than female speech turns by a factor of more than 20. Because, as I said a minute ago, this is a very, very male space, right? We did get enough women to have good statistical power here because we're looking at speech turns rather than like individual people. But lots more men. We had about 2 female speakers per episode. So about 2,000 women total, which translates into lots of speech turns. But we had way more than 2,000 men, lots and lots. So if we look at, then we use BERTopic text as data modeling to find the text models. That works best for the kind of shorter text data that we have here. So if you look over time, this is a little small on the screen. We came up with a set of text topics here. One of the number one topic is like you're listening to Alex Jones show, whatever. Like the Alex Jones program, they talk about themselves a lot. Buy our products, subscribe to our stuff. We're fighting the good fight. You really need us. We are the last best hope of freedom. All that stuff ends up in topic 0. Topic 1, underneath that, has to do with vaccine, flu, COVID, stuff like that, which you may have suspicions about what that's about. We're going to look at an example of that in a moment. The next one down is guns, police amendments, church, Bible, Jesus, kids, children, school, parents, and then there's a bunch of other stuff. Well, I'll cut it off right there. And you can see that there's some change over time. The one big thing is that there's the giant spike in vaccine, flu, COVID during COVID. That makes sense, right? There's also a general increase in topics as things go on because InfoWars began broadcasting more during the Trump era than they had before. That's fine. Okay. So I chose a high probability transcript from topic 1 for us to actually take a look at so that we can qualitatively get a sense of what this is. This is the vaccine, flu, COVID topic. On the vaccine, I said I'm going to stop, but I noticed a lot of calls are on that because they're coming all over the world before inoculations. Just people are waking up 50 years ago in New Guinea or places in Africa or wherever. People went to the white witch doctors and they wanted shots. They wanted help. Now they run. My baby died at the shot. Her baby died at the shot. They don't need medical degrees to know what's going on. And then in Africa and India, they test the shot and they find that they're adding to it hormones. So your body creates an autoimmune response to the hormone. So your body has an autoimmune response attacking your ovaries. That's the woman's huevos. This is incredible stuff, in my opinion. There's more and more and more. Like, it goes. See? There's CRISPR in there because they genetically engineer you with the vaccines. So this is maybe not a carefully reasoned, evidence-based concern about vaccine problems. I'm choosing my words. These are slightly overheated, right? But this is the kind of topic you get consistently in number 1. Even before COVID. This transcript actually predates COVID. So this is not a COVID topic. InfoWars cashed in on COVID, but they were big on anti-vax stuff well before that. The other one I want to take a look at, and the opening part of this episode was also about vaccines allegedly killing people. Yep, great. We could also take a look at a high probability transcript from topic 4, and this was the women, family, schools topic, which sounds on its surface pretty benign, right? Everybody wants to think about families and schools. Here's the transcript. I've seen a product of the leftist indoctrination in K-12 schools. I want to stop that, and I protect kids. Okay, I'm going to skip down here a little bit. They're promoting CRT, which is critical race theory, which I think is very, very uncommon in kindergarten. They sneak it in, as well as gender theory that shouldn't be being discussed in K-12 schools, so I'm going to testify against that stuff. So we're starting to get some a little unusual education content. So let's see. I'm going to a board of trustees member from UT Southwestern Medical School. They recently had a gender clinic shut down, but they took the name off the website and integrated gender care for minors into other programs. So I'm advocating for children and, hopefully kind of taking back the culture. So what does advocating for children mean here? It's culture war stuff, right? This is a topic that's about things like anti-feminism, racism, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ advocacy. It's dressed a little bit more politely anti-vax topic. I'll give them that. But this is a topic that's also kind of extremist, right? So we can see this from the transcripts, that these are pretty hard topics. So when we compare, and I'm sorry that the results are small, I'll summarize this. What we're doing here is comparing female presenting voices to male presenting voices in terms of their probability of being in each of these topics. And what we find is that female presenting voices are significantly and substantially overrepresented in topics 1 and 4. There isn't an equally large difference in any of the others. Women are way more likely than men per minute on the show to talk about vaccine conspiracies and these conspiracies about how everyone's out there trying to ruin the family with anti-racism and gender, which I think is really interesting. Our theory on this is that women are taking advantage of stereotypical gender ideas about the family and caregiving to put themselves in a position to address some of the dominant messages of the far right and advance their careers as far-right influencers without stepping outside their role as women, so that these topics give them that platform, right? And that's what we think we're seeing here. So our plan is to look at some case studies, not just at how women versus men are addressing these topics, which we're going to do with some more in-depth readings like the ones we were just looking at, but also of case studies of specific women who've appeared on InfoWars and how they use that to advance their careers. Because if this ambition theory is right, we should be seeing women using the opportunity to appear on InfoWars to kind of build an influencer or political advocate career within the far right in a way that's a little distinctive and maybe more common than men. Because men have a lot of opportunities to do that within this space. Women don't. And we should be able to see that ambition path more often with the women. So we want to look for that with the case study stuff here. So this is an example. I don't think this is the only way you can do this, but I think this is a way you can add qualitative evidence to what is otherwise a very strongly statistical text as data type study to do a mixed method approach there as well. So in conclusion, I think we have opportunities here to really combine qualitative and text as data and data science methods in ways that open up real new opportunities. This is an area where I don't think that what I've presented today with the work that me and my co-authors have done comes close to exhausting the possibilities. There's lots of options for the rest of you to come up with new things. This is an open space, new research frontier. But I hope that the ideas that I've presented today give people thoughts, right? That there's things you're thinking of that you can maybe go do with some of these designs that I've discussed. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Jay. I think it's more than just give us some thoughts or some ideas. I think it's quite provocative, and I think we should and could use it as in our research, not only for dealing with data, but also with the literature. I was considering not doing more literature review in the same way now. I'm considering using text as data analysis just to understand the literature. So I open the floor for the audience. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, anything that you have, feel free, raise up your hand. I give you the mic.
I especially enjoy angry denunciations.
Go ahead. Don't be shy. Who's the first? It's always like this. Every time we're doing this, people get shy and they don't have to make a question public in English and so on. Let's see. Who's the Nobody? No? Luis? Please.
Thank you, Professor Jay. It's always great to see your lectures, and it's always thought-provoking to see new ways these kind of methodologies are being applied. You used a little of this text-to data analysis in your class last year,
Yeah.
and I was experienced with it throughout the year. I think one opportunity that you didn't mention, but I would like to hear your opinion on, is on the use of metadata beyond just text to data from speeches. Of course, in the example you brought from InfoWars, it's most from direct speeches that were transcribed. But when you are using data from articles, for example, as you mentioned, there is the metadata on publishing, on where it was published, on dates, and using this also as, as controls for the analysis. I want to know what's the next steps of using this kind of information together with the speech themselves. So
Yeah.
Thank you once more.
No, that's great. So with the articles thing, and I didn't get into this because it just didn't. In the articles thing, we do control for which discipline something's published in and the year it's published. We agonized about whether to control for the impact factor, and we decided not to. Because I think in the end, like whether something's highly influential or not, we're really looking for a diversity of usages more than like how famous a usage is. So we decided not to do that here. But including control variables in these models is actually very simple. It's a lot like a regression. You just kind of stick them in. The downside to it is that you then have to explain that you did some control variables. People may want to see the coefficients. The coefficients are usually not very interesting or important. And then you have some extra stuff you have to wave your hands about. And that's a choice you have to make, basically.
Okay. Jay, let me just ask you one question about one of your results there. On the slide, on the previous slide, you said that that's this one, if I could see it right. And for the group 5, there is also a gender, or am I looking at wrong?
So almost everything is statistically
Significant, but
Yes.
it's positive for 5, in the row 5,
positive
eh?
for 5. That's
Yeah,
right.
you said for the 1 and 4. What's there for group 5? Do you remember
Group
that?
5 was, group 5 is really boring. Because group 5 is like blah, yeah, okay, So women were more likely than men to use filler words.
Oh.
So like, I mean, all right. Maybe I'm being very woman right now because I'm, but I don't know that that's a super interesting
Yeah, no,
finding to
okay.
us. Like
Okay.
that's just a fact in our data that the women on these shows used more filler words.
It doesn't
It
seem,
may be an interesting thing for linguists, but for us politically, it wasn't that
I
interesting.
would say it's not
Yeah.
political. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I was just curious about it.
No, right. That you're right that that's there, but it was something that wasn't that interesting.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Who else? There. The mic. Where is the mic? Is it with? Tá lá atrás. No. I'm talking to someone else. Yeah.
Hi, thanks Professor Jay for this amazing presentation and opportunity that you are presenting to us. I have one more general question, which I have debated on other occasions. One of the main characteristics, in my point of view, of discourse analysis is the attempt to reconstruct the contextual and the interactional factors, dimensions of the speech act. Do you think that machine learning or other artificial intelligence softwares can assist us in this difficult and really detailed task of trying to understand what contextual and interactional factors affected the outcome of discursive interaction or process? Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. I think that's an interesting and complicated question. And that's something where there is some literature about this. I think it's very much a kind of open and debated topic. I want to say I do not think that there are tools that will do it for you. That's also true for most things. Like there are not tools that will do quantitative causal inference for you, or tools that will do more, I don't like the word positivist, but you know what I mean, case studies for you either. No automated techniques exist that do good social science for us in any of these fields. And the same is true, I think, for discourse analysis. However, that said, some of the techniques I've talked about today and some related techniques can be useful in putting the text you're looking at in a different light, so that you can look in depth at a particular passage and then say, well, look, how many times across these 10,000 documents does this phrase occur? And you can use the computer to quickly find them all. And then you can say, all right, are they all similar, or are there differences in terms of the nearby words? And for that, the BERT topic thing that I was just using is really useful. And it might help you categorize, these are the 4 or 5 different kinds of phrases in the neighborhood of this word. And then you could jump in and compare some of those. And that kind of thing isn't going to do the work for you, but it's a tool that gives you a different lens for interacting with the text. I always find that kind of thing helpful. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in and make one question again. Manuel? No, go ahead. No, go ahead. I have the power of the mic.
Okay.
Genius.
Thank you, Jay, for your presentation. I really like it. I will make 2 questions since we have some time. So my first question is a more provocative one. It's not something that I necessarily agree with, but I would like to hear your thoughts. So what you described here, what's different from good quantitative only research, right? Because if you do quantitative research, like running regression, putting a lot of data and variables that you don't know very well, I mean, I wouldn't say that that's good quantitative research. You have to know the data, where they are coming from, how they are measured, etc. What is the meaning that of the concept, and how your measurement corresponds or not to the concept behind the regression, etc. So I'd like to hear you about it. Like, is it really mixed methods, or just very good quantitative research? How it's supposed to be done?
Okay. So before you go to your second question, I think it's best that I answer, and then we'll come to your second question. Is that okay? So this is a really great question, and it's one that people ask in both directions all the time. So like, what's going on here that's different? So I think for different parts of this, there are different things. For the first couple of parts, I wasn't really doing quantitative stuff. I was actually really doing qualitative stuff and then using the quantitative tools as addition. So that's a little different. But for this last part where we were looking at women's participation, that's a quantitative study. So the question is, what's different here? And I'm going to say most text as data studies, people don't systematically jump in and read a lot of the underlying texts. They may read a couple, although a lot of the time they don't. They look at the words, they look at the diagnostics that are built into the data, but they don't iterate back and forth between the underlying texts and the model. So going back to the underlying texts and qualitatively reading and analyzing what's going on, we did it a little quick in here because it's a presentation. In actual research, we're doing that slow and carefully and triangulating this with our theoretical understanding and knowledge. That's qualitative, and that brings in a multi-method component. And the case studies we're doing of women's careers after the after their appearances on InfoWars, motivated by our quantitative finding, are purely qualitative, right? There's components here that you wouldn't see in a standard Textus data study. And I think that it is true that good quantitative research involves like knowledge of things, but there's a difference of kind between knowing stuff and carrying out qualitative research. So that's what we want to get to. Okay, second question.
Okay, thank you very much. So my second question is, so for instance, you were trying to understand the effect of gender, if I got it correctly, the effect of gender on the participations in the discussions at InfoWars. So how do you can be sure that's a causal effect of gender? So what's the story to make us believe that it's, I mean, intuitively it makes sense, right? But I mean, asking more to understand what would be an approach when we may be more skeptical that there is some confounder. I can't think anything here, but more from a general point of view. So what's the story that you recommend if you want to use for a causal analysis and people ask about if there is any confounder, etc.
Right. In this instance, I have the advantage that people don't think that well about gender most of the time. So to have a confounder, I need a cause of gender that also causes your choice of topics. And most people, if I say, well, what are the causes of gender, their mind goes blank. So like you, they can't think of any. And that puts me in a very strong position. But the way I think of this is that it's a little bit less of a direct causal argument, actually. What we're thinking about is that we think that women are operating here out of ambition, right? We think that women are taking advantage of the opportunity to try to advance their careers. And we think that an observable implication of that would be that they would take advantage of existing stereotypes to position themselves to speak about core themes of the far-right movement in ways that match gender stereotypes. So we're able to see results that fit that expectation, but it's not a direct, like we think gender causes that speech pattern. It's more that that's an observable implication of the theory. So this is a little different kind of structure, because I don't really know what it would mean for gender to cause, like you just talk about vaccines. That's a little weird, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Who else? Look, Natalia também. So, this one.
Thank you very much, Professor Jay, for your talk. At the beginning, you mentioned that we are still relying too much on triangulation. So my first question is that a new kind of triangulation or simply the continuation of the logic of triangulation with the use of the most recent computational methods? And the second question, do you see any role, particularly for other methods that you didn't mention, of course, that was not expected, you already explored a lot, but like elite interviewing and proper archival research, although some things that you brought here can fit into archival research? Thank you very much again.
Sure, absolutely. So I make a distinction between triangulation and integrative multi-method research. So for me, triangulation is where you kind of have two methods and you carry them out side by side and then compare their answers at the end. In none of the examples I gave today, we didn't do that, right? What we did instead was we used different methods for different phases of the research, and they kind of contribute to each other so that they feed into each other in some way. Like the Textus data model gives you a backdrop from which you pick cases that you then present to the audience, so that the one is contributing to the next rather than them being parallel to each other. That second model is what I call integrative, because they're connected together in some kind of sequential order where this one links to this by doing some task, rather than existing as separate streams. To me, that second approach is better because we have a logic for connecting the methods rather than just trying to set them next to each other and see what happens. And that's kind of my main argument, actually, at a like meta level about how to do these designs. In terms of the second question of, like, yeah, for archival research, I think a lot of the stuff I talked about today would work in a lot of the same way. If you have a bunch of texts that you've collected, you can scan them into your computer and do a lot of these text as data things or machine learning things, and it would work fine. I think the Department of Justice example counts as archival, so that is an instance of that. That kind of thing works. For elite interviewing, those are also texts. Your interview notes are texts. I have a graduate student, Pilar Mansigari, who in her dissertation did interviews with just a huge number of wealthy people in Mexico, Honduras, and Uruguay. And those interview transcripts, she was able to, among other things, transcribe and then do text as data work on. And so that some of these things can be done with that kind of work. In her case, the result was that all of those people talked very similarly to each other, which on the one hand is interesting because elites are like super, super similar across national boundaries in terms of their language. But on the other hand, also was not like publishable. Like, yeah, everyone, there had to be qualitative work to track down the more subtle differences before she was able to go forward with that. So in that case, like, there was something to learn, but not the kind of thing that we were really hoping for. But you can do that kind of thing there as well.
Okay. Not bad.
Thank you very much. Jay, was really interesting presentation. And one question that I was thinking was about your piece on violence and thinking about the next piece on gender.
Yep.
So I was curious if you test any or if you check whether you find a relationship between gender and violence, because on one hand you could expect that maybe women would be less prone to engage on violent acts in that context. On the other hand, given your hypothesis that they are using the InfoWar as a platform for engaging and promoting their political career or activism, they would be maybe use that event of to engage in more violent acts, just to have an effect and show up in the media and show up among their followers as someone that went there and did something.
So yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I a little beyond what I'm talking about today, one of the things I'm looking at with these congressional invasions is the use of social media by people who do the invasions, which is like a super, super big part of the story. Like, these people are using the acts they did to try to build their personal brand. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the women who went into the Capitol were very much involved in doing that. Now, that doesn't mean that they were, punching police, but because you can live stream yourself on like whatever from your cell phone inside like a Capitol building and without being the bear spray guy. Like those are two different variables. A lot of the people who did violence did also broadcast and say, "Come join us. We need reinforcements," and stuff like that. But there were also people who would go and pose in front of a statue and do a little Facebook Live where they say, "Hey, it's really cool in here. All the patriots are here, liberty and justice and whatever." And yeah.
Great, thank you. My second question was thinking about the first piece. I'm sorry, I got a little bit late here, but just to make sure, you are saying that the time to deliver the package is associated, so if it takes longer to deliver the package, it's more likely to be associated with less partisanship and more corruption, something like that?
So okay, that was not the formal example. This was a lower key example. But yeah, it turns out that if a package spent no, the thing on the screen has nothing to do with it, Glauco. I was just flipping through, and then I realized that we were asking about something that wasn't on the slides. No, the example had to do with, I was looking at macro partisanship in Latin America. And it turned out that countries where a package that is delivered into the country spends more time in customs had higher levels of partisanship than countries where packages spent less time in customs, which struck me initially in the results as super weird. And you know, the kind of thing that we would say, wow, that's dumb, and throw it away. But looking into it, you know, as I said in the thing, that turns out to be those are people looking for bribes. And that a political machine helps you avoid having to pay the bribe because you can have clout, right? You can have a connection with someone powerful who gets your package out. And if your package is going to be stuck in there for like 5 years or something, if you don't get someone to help you, then there's a really strong value to having a party tie. Whereas if packages go through really quickly because the state is well organized, you don't need that party tie, and the value of a party is lower. So efficient bureaucratic states in Latin America are associated with lower levels of macro-partisanship, and corrupt states are associated with higher levels of macro-partisanship, is the theory.
Did you consider to include in the sample the developed economies as well to see
The
if
what?
the developed economies to see if that holds?
So this was only Latin America. I don't know how it would work in developed economies, and party systems are very different in different parts of the world. Maybe it would be different. I don't know. But people underestimate how much corruption there is in places like the United States, is something I'm going to say. We think it's all very clean, but they aren't studied in the same way. And so we don't have good comparative metrics.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor, for your insightful presentation. It got me really curious and enthusiastic to learn more about the topic. And I was wondering about the limitations of gender due to pitch, but also
Yes.
how did you define the age variable?
Okay, so the age variable is also from the same data source. So it's also based on features of the voice. So as people age, their voice takes on a bunch. I don't know the details on this, but there are sort of tonal properties that tend to go as you age. And this is the probability of being above a certain age is what the age variable measures.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because I understand that some socio-demographic variables would be
It
difficult
would
to
be
extract.
great to have more.
Yeah.
But one of the problems is that all we really have basically is people's voices, right? So we don't really have the ability to get a ton of information, right? But no, I agree that the pitch thing it is a little more than pitch. There's timbre and a couple of other things. Like there's a few other things that the thing is attentive to. But pitch is a very strong part of it. We double-checked this qualitatively by pulling out a sample of the recordings and having a bunch of research assistants listen to the samples and code them by hand. And the human ear coding matched the machine coding almost perfectly. The one case where it didn't was an instance where Alex Jones was doing an unbelievably offensive Asian accent. And that was coded as female. But that was our one glitch in the coding. So generally speaking, it seems like it works reasonably well to match what a person would stereotypically think about the voice. That doesn't mean that it matches the person's gender identity, obviously, but it matches what a person listening to the voice would think they're hearing, which is about as far as I can get.
Thank you.
Someone else? I said I had one question. So now it's my turn. I just want to get back to one topic that we discussed last week during the seminar. You were not here, so...
No, so I'm
yeah.
curious to find out.
Yeah. We're talking about how to think of how to theorize from case studies and how it travels through other cases. I just want to hear a little bit from you about this topic, because we are explaining specific situations in the U.S. and Brazil. Sometimes we're comparing those cases and or explaining what happened during a very important period of time or an important event. However, how can it be helpful in order to create a theory about similar cases? Are we expecting to see, are we talking about the far right or movements from the far right against the democracy? Exactly. How do you see this sort of discussion when we are doing a qualitative research like that? This is the...
Yes. So this is a good question. And this is one that we talked about in my class a little bit this morning. This is something that I think is
I
very
should
important.
be there.
No, I'm happy to talk again. I can do this. This is fine. So the reality is, when we study, most of our research designs are in one way or another bound to a particular place and time. Like if I do an experiment on a bunch of, I don't know, college students in Chicago, that's not actually about, retired people in Singapore, right?
Yeah.
If I do a survey right now in Brazil, that doesn't generalize to Peruvians necessarily, right? Doesn't even generalize to Brazilians before the pandemic necessarily, right? Most of our research designs are snapshots of a population, a place, and a time. And case studies are that too. And so with most of our research projects, we should be asking these same questions, not just case studies.
Yeah.
We should be thinking, hey, does this project apply in different ways to different places? I think those are good questions to ask. And the questions we should ask are, how would we answer that? The answer is always replication, right? Always replication. And then the question is this replication worth it? Is there something about the particular research context we're asking about that's interesting and different enough to make it worth doing this study again? If so, either you or I or someone is going to do it, and then let's talk about how. And then we're there. And if not, then maybe it's interesting to sort of speculate about what it would be, but we're not going to do it because it's not interesting enough, so no, let's not lose sleep about it.
Okay.
And that's really where we want to go with this. I don't think I can study January 6th and tell you about the Oklahoma City bombing from the 1990s. Those are very different moments in the history of the far right. There are things that we could ask questions about from Oklahoma City based on my work.
Okay.
But you would want to go do that project, right? That's what we do.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Jay, for the presentation. It was super interesting. My question is related, I think it was mentioned on some of the questions, but I still have it on my mind, which is about the hierarchy between the methods.
Okay.
So basically, I was wondering in what situation you would find in the qualitative research something which is different from what you found on your text as data analysis. So for instance, in the two cases, you created some categories, right? One is on the types of violence, and the other is on the types of speech in some way. You have these types of categories. How can the qualitative analysis be anything but like a substantiation of those categories?
Sure. That's a great question. So first of all, with this gender stuff, with the one I have on the screen right now, the qualitative reading really colors the meaning of these topics. So the meaning, which like the model gives us, these models are trained off of Google's corpus. So it tends towards a kind of middle of the road labeling because it's trained across like all of the English language. And on average, the English language doesn't consist of extremist weirdos. So it tends to pick non-extremist weirdo labels for the topics. So the labels are more moderate and more bland than the actual contents. So the qualitative reading helps us unpack that and see that the contents here really are pretty, I'm going to say spicy, right? They help us reflavor the meaning of these topics significantly in terms of what's going on inside. And I think that that is something more than just confirmation. We're shifting our interpretation away. But second, something that is a possible finding, and I didn't have an example of that today, but something that is a possible finding is that you read 2 or 3 documents from inside a topic, and they just have nothing to do with each other. They're completely unrelated. The topic is incoherent. There's nothing going on. It makes no sense. And that's a qualitative way of raising questions about maybe the topic model failed. That is a possible thing to have happen. And these topic models don't have really strong statistical measures to tell you whether they work or not. Like, that's not really one of the things. They're kind of very pragmatic. They just give you results. So if they are giving you results that's a little bit nonsense, a good way to find that out is by doing this qualitative reading and seeing that the groups are just kind of silly, silly, silly. So that's a way that the qualitative reading can lead you to say, hey, this didn't work. Maybe I want to revisit this, do a different model, or model it in a different way. So that feedback can go backwards in the other direction. Great question.
I think we have time for one more question. Please, is there anyone? Someone? No? No? Luis again? It's not an interview, okay?
Yes, of course. Just a short question.
No, but
Did you already work with the journal AIF data from the Brazilian
Not
writing
as
acts?
much. So one of the things is I'm holding on a little bit to make so I want as many of the court things to be finished as possible. It's better for me to get to the end of that stuff so that I can do similar stuff to what I was doing here. I want things to settle a little, and then the data collection is a lot easier. So I'm holding off to make sure everything is kind of settled, if that makes sense.
Luis, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Okay, guys, so thank you very much, Jay, for the presentation. It was extremely interesting, very thoughtful. I think everyone here learned a lot about what you're saying. Our research, at least my research, is going to be kind of different. At least I'm going to think a lot about what was just said. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
And see you all tomorrow.